Welcome to Whole Health. We're happy you're here on this journey of exploration with us as we learn what it means to live a life dedicated to spiritual, mental, and physical health. Before we begin our program, we want to share a brief legal disclaimer. The information provided on this program, including any health-related advice or discussions, is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making any decisions regarding your health. Now, let's turn it over to Pastor Jeremy, Dr. Kala Kleen, and Brittany Pfeiffer for today's episode of Whole Health.
Welcome back to Whole Health, where we talk about how to honor God with our bodies, and that's body, mind, and spirit. I'm Jeremy Higgins, and I'm blessed to be here with Dr. Kala Kleen, chiropractor and longevity provider, as well as Brittany Pfeiffer, our functional nutrition counselor. Now, today we're going to be kind of diving into some areas, some topics of conversation that might stress you out. Actually, we're just talking about stress, specifically cortisol, and why so many adults feel exhausted and burnt out, even wired and anxious. You've probably heard people say that stress is the problem, cortisol is the problem. We just need to lower it. But is that actually true? Dr. Kala, let's start there. Is stress a new thing?
Yeah, so stress is not new. And what I love about the Bible is that, man, there's so many things that you can take that have biblical context that have so much application in today. But even in the garden, Adam had to work and he had a responsibility. He had to tend, cultivate, and provide, and it was not easy. And we were told it wasn't going to be easy. Right. So effort was part of God's design. And then he did not design a stress-free existence. He designed a stress-adaptable body. What I love about our body and just the greatness of the machine that he created for us that houses our soul is that we sweat when we're hot, we shiver when we're cold. All of those things are adaptations to our environment. So avoiding all of the stress doesn't make us strong. In fact, that actually makes us weak and fragile. Short-term stress builds resilience, and it sharpens the brain, it mobilizes energy, and it improves our adaptation over time. We see this all the time all around us. If we see a baby chick hatching out of its shell, if we go to help that, because we see this innocence and this tiny little creature, sure. If we go help it, the bird isn't going to be strong enough to survive. Same thing with like the butterfly hatching out of the chrysalis. Like that stress on those wings helps build that muscle for adaptation, for life-giving. So a lot of times, people are like, we got to avoid stress. And it's like, well, we do need some stress so that we can have that adaptation. So the issue isn't really stress itself. The issue is the chronic stress without rhythm and recovery.
So stress in the right form, it's not punishment, it's design. We were actually just, talking before we got started here, how, there were times in Scripture where the Lord would lead his disciples out into the storm to teach them the lesson of the storm. On two separate occasions, out onto the Sea of Galilee, he brought them into stressful situations to strengthen their spirit and no doubt their body in the process. Brittany, can you walk us through what cortisol is actually supposed to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So cortisol is produced by your adrenal glands, but under the direction of your brain. So you have the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. It's a very complex interaction between your hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, your adrenals. They all work together. But that helps regulate your body's response to stress, mood, digestion, immune function. That communication system is essential for managing life and keep maintaining homeostasis in your body, right? So in a healthy system, your cortisol kind of follows a rhythm. It's supposed to peak in the morning when you wake up. So that's your cortisol awakening response. And then it gradually declines throughout the day, and it should be lowest at night, so your melatonin can rise, and then that's when you sleep and repair, right? And so your cortisol is essential for many things, and we'll get into this in more detail throughout this episode, but blood sugar stability, your blood pressure, your immune functions, inflammation. It's not toxic. I know it's a buzzword all over social media right now. Right. Everyone's like, you have high cortisol. Do you have belly fat? No, it's all this. Like, it's just all these like targeted ads of like, but cortisol is not the problem. It is God's designed. It's supposed to help with stress. So like we said, this will be kind of a recurring thing. Stress is not a bad thing. But when we see that rhythm is off and we wake up and our cortisol is not where it's supposed to be, it's too high, it's too low, then we do start to see some problems. So we have to just kind of get back to the roots and get back in rhythm the way our bodies were designed.
So then it's not about eliminating cortisol, it's about restoring rhythm. And again, like you see so much of that online that you start to think, well, this is a toxic substance and you have to be so careful. I'd imagine that a lot of parents think that they have high cortisol. Is that usually what you see in your practice?
Not a lot, actually. So people when they come in, most of the time people, honestly, I don't know if they just don't feel bad enough until we've passed that point. Because at first you have that high cortisol, but eventually your cortisol cannot keep that up forever. Sure. So just a little like stages of adrenal fatigue, get a little nerdy here. Stage 1 is kind of the alarm phase. That's your immediate response. When stress hits, that could be emotional, physical, metabolic. Your brain signals your adrenal glands to release that cortisol, and that's your fight or flight. So it's going to short term, this is protective, this is good. We're designed to be this way. Like if there's a stressor, like let's see, like you are literally in danger. You want these things. You want your blood sugar to rise. You need energy. You need alertness. You need a heart rate to be able to run from danger. But if it's not real danger, perceived danger, mental, load, things like that, and that stress just continues without ever having recovery, that's when your adrenals are going to like, hey, I need a little bit of help. I'm going to tap out here. Like I can't continue to produce it at this high level. So over time, people are going to start to react more strongly to even small stressors. Things that used to be manageable are now overwhelming because the system's on high alert. So that's stage 1. Okay. That's where people are like, oh, I have high cortisol. And that a lot of times we don't see people in practice till they hit like stage 2, stage 3, because
I'm just wondering that.
They're able to maintain life at that stage.
Sure.
Like, so in stage 2, that's where now we have had the stress ongoing for a longer amount of time. And so now the body's having a hard time keeping up with this demand. So this is where you see the weight gain, especially around the midsection, sleep disturbances, increased infections, like your body's not able to fight things off as well, or you take longer to recover from illnesses because your immune functions begins to shift. So things like that, long-term metabolic stress can contribute to like insulin resistance, bone density issues. So the body is still compensating, but it's having to work really hard to do it because it's been going on for a while.
Sure.
Stage 3 is like after prolonged stress. So your system can now, it's been putting out so much cortisol for so long, it can't do it anymore. So now your cortisol, instead of peaking high in the morning and like going down, you're not having that high peak. We're starting the day, halfway as what we were so used to doing, especially in the morning. So you wake up fatigued, you could have difficulty getting out of bed, brain fog, low blood pressure, low blood sugar, panic, anxiety, things like that. So it's not that your adrenals are failing, but they're just so fatigued from being high for so long. And then stage 4 is basically your adrenals are really, really tired and you're just can't even get out of bed at that point. You're struggling to do anything. I don't want people to worry, be like, I'm stage 4, I'm so bad. But that we don't see that a lot. But most people, like, you're having a hard time maintaining life at stage 2, stage 3. That's a lot of times when we see people come in because they're like, okay, I'm doing things I know to do and they're not quite getting better. So most, summary, early stage, you feel wired and reactive. Mid stage, you can feel kind of just like inflamed, weight gain, heavy. The later stage, you just feel completely depleted at that point. So circling.
I relate to each of those stages.
Yeah, at different points of your day.
I was actually thinking about different points of like parenting and how that was a big, connecting point.
Absolutely. So circling back to the parenting question, so people with young kids who haven't slept well for months or years, that prolonged broken sleep can blunt your cortisol morning spikes. So those people probably don't have high cortisol. They probably have lower issues, where if you're in the more of the beginning stages, you're going to have that higher one.
Or they just yo-yo inappropriately, right? Like they wake up in the morning, they're exhausted, so they have a pot of coffee, then they go to work, then they have lunch, then they feel like they need a nap. After lunch, then they go home, they have dinner, and then it's 10 o'clock at night, and they're wired. They're, and so that's a little bit, again, of that stage 2. And then sometimes they'll be in that stage 2, and then they'll get a Saturday where they can sleep for 10 hours,
wow.
And then they get that recovery, but then they're just back on the hamster wheel of life.
Right. Yeah. Not too familiar.
So some people will think that they need to lower their cortisol. And if you do, like these are some cortisol lowering things like fasting, cold plunges, high intensity type things, training. There's some supplements and things that you can take. But a lot of people who are struggling in this area doing, like if you have adrenal issues, like prolonged fasting is not a great thing for you to do. Like your adrenals are not made to do that if they're already struggling. So things we'll get into this more detail, but basic things that you can do to help, like morning sunlight is severely underappreciated. It's not, that is a big thing, helping your circadian rhythm.
Not always easy to come by here in Northeast Iowa.
Yeah.
Also true. And then blood sugar stability, minerals, boundaries around your schedule, and make like really honoring, like this is when I need to sleep, this is when I need to rest. And then like sleep opportunity, making sure you have, like they call it this, like making sure you actually go to bed 8 hours before you need to be awake, things like that.
I'm feeling fairly convicted at this point. So let's get out our shovels and dig a little deeper here. Dr. Calla, how much of this comes back to that circadian rhythm?
Yeah, so circadian rhythm is the master regulator. It controls our cortisol, our melatonin, blood sugar, thyroid, and a lot of even hormone production. So when the sun comes up in the morning, and again, just depending on where you live in relation to the equator and the season that we're in, when it's wintertime, we have a lot more almost like a hibernation kind of like schedule.
Right.
We don't have a whole lot of sun exposure. And the further north you get, I mean, they talk about doing studies of people who live like in Alaska and like Finland because they have such little sunlight exposure throughout a big portion of their year. And they actually age at higher rates because of this, that they're going to work when it's dark. They're coming home and it's dark, all of the time. But one of the biggest things though, too, with the circadian rhythm, if it's disrupted and we're not getting into that deep and REM sleep, and this is big. So circadian rhythm, they've shown like firefighters, police officers, first responders, and anybody who works swing shift, that they are working when it's dark out.
Oh, sure.
And so then their whole sleep rhythm, and then we can see that if they're not getting in that deep and REM, they're not getting that restoration and their brain is not actually going to sleep. So then we see significant hormone decline, and then we see that immune system breakdown and then that inflammatory cascade. So oftentimes is what happened. It's like this is our modern life that we live in and has disrupted it. But agent stress happened during the daylight and then it resolved when they went to bed. Everything shut down. They didn't have artificial light in the streets. Like I know you guys go to Arizona a lot.
Right.
My husband and I love going to Arizona, and you would notice how dark it is. Like they have
Right.
laws about like they call it like the dark sky in Arizona because they have like sun. They don't allow like certain like wattage of lights
Right.
to go off, and you can actually see the stars
Right.
out there in Arizona. So I bet there's studies that would prove like people in Arizona that have lived out there because they're not disrupted with that artificial light. Yeah, but morning sunlight anchors that cortisol awakening response. Darkness at night allows melatonin to rise. Blue light at night. So blue light is that toxic screen, whether it's the TV screen or on our phones. And, the sad thing is like even our kids, their schoolwork is often on
Right.
Chromebooks and iPads, but it just keeps that cortisol elevated. And so even daylight savings time increases that inflammation and disrupts sleep. So even that 1 hour shift in biology, which if you're a parent, most people say daylight savings time is a tragedy. But it's like we can observe that 1 hour can shift and have an impact on biology. Imagine what years of rhythm disruption does to us.
Wow, that really is fascinating. So, we've talked about cortisol and talked about rhythm, but stress doesn't just affect energy. It affects the immune system too. Brittany, can you walk us through what that does to immunity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people, when they think of stress, they only think like mood and sleep and things like that. But stress affects our body at the cellular level. So it changes our immune behavior. When we're under chronic stress, your cortisol and your like dopamine or epinephrine, things like that, they suppress parts of your immune system, especially those natural killer cells. Those are crucial. They help destroy your virus-infected cells. They're anything abnormal before it becomes a problem. So when you're chronically under stress, their activity goes down. So now you're not able to fight off things as efficiently. And same time, it also lowers our secretory IgA, which is one of the most important immune markers in your gut. It's like your knight in your standing on your gut lining. It's supposed to keep things out and keep things in appropriately, right? And about 80% of your gut or your immune system lives in your gut. Secretory IgA is one of the main things that helps protect it. So when we see those things low, we get more viral infections, slower recovery, more food sensitivities, colds, things like that. So that's why people a lot of time will get sick when they finally stop and rest, like if they go on vacation. The immune system has been suppressed under the stress for so long, and once you kind of slow down and relax, now the symptoms show up. I literally had this happen last year. I went on vacation I never go, me and my husband, and we both got a cold.
Yeah.
So it's like, it shifts it all, and so that it all plays into the whole stress system.
That's really interesting, and no doubt knowledge is power. Understanding those things helps us to, I think, be a little bit better productive in our lives. I think especially the idea that rest reveals what stress was, kind of hiding away. Reminds me that, peace isn't passive, peace is protective. And Dr. Kalak, let's talk a little bit more about the system. People don't always, connect to stress. Blood sugar, for instance.
Yeah, so I actually observe this oftentimes too, especially in patients that are literally doing the diet lifestyle accurate. They're eating very clean. They don't eat added sugar, or they're intentionally avoiding the added sugar. And then we get their fasting blood sugar, their A1C, and their fasting insulin, and it looks like they're lying to me.
Wow.
And really it's like, okay, this is potentially the cortisol as the root cause of like, why are those blood sugars upset? So it's an overlooked connection, but cortisol's job is to maintain blood sugar. When the body perceives stress, cortisol tells the liver to release glucose. That is a process called like gluconeogenesis. Think new sugars. So it's protective in the short term. We want a spike in energy. Let's say a cheetah is going to start chasing you, Jeremy. You want your cortisol to rise. And when you're, danger, when your body perceives an accurate danger, all of the blood leaves the core and goes to your extremities so you can run. Your eyes vasodilate so you can focus on where you're going to go to escape. But a lot of that happens by way of this increased blood sugar to get you the energy to support the running phase, right? I got to run from that cheetah. I got to run from this stress. But when the stress is chronic, the liver continues and that glucose just builds up even if you're eating clean. So this is where sometimes like patients will go to their, conventional healthcare provider and they say, oh, those blood sugars are getting up. And they're like, but I'm doing everything right. And they're like, yeah, eat less and work out more. Sometimes that could be more detrimental if we're not asking the patient, how are you handling stress? What's going on? Yeah. Brittany and I were talking as we were preparing for this, even if somebody's doing everything right and they don't mentally feel stressed out, we can see it in wearables of like, well, what's going on with the gut health? Is the gut inflamed? What is physiologically being your stressor? And is the stressor of your high functioning just not sleeping?
Right.
There's a lot of different things that really can be the culprit of this cortisol release. My husband does not mind me sharing this story. A couple years ago, we had done a baseline of all of his labs. Then 2 weeks later at a work, a very sad tragedy happened where a coworker died in a work-related accident. And over a 3 months period of time, because my husband is a male, obviously, men, I always say when they're stressed out, those jerks lose weight, where women are stressed out and they'll pack on the pounds by looking at a donut. But Tyler was losing weight, so you would think he's getting healthier, but he was not sleeping. 1 to 3 a.m. is a big adrenal if you're waking up those times. So he would wake up, his brain was just raring to go. So he entertained it, then went to his office, hammered out some work. So over time, I would notice like Tyler is a saint in my opinion, but he would like lose his mind on the kids or, very just a short fuse. I'm like, let's see what's going on with your labs. Let's get another snapshot. His cortisol was like at 28. So he was in this acute phase. His testosterone shifted to the left 200 points. So it didn't put him in low T, but it just was a clear and obvious drain, which testosterone is so important for sleeping and recovery. And his fasting blood sugar and A1C put him 2 points away from being a full-blown type 2 diabetic.
Wow.
And so, but like we knew that wasn't necessarily a diet lifestyle. That was, he was undergoing extreme stress. OSHA was coming in, the attorneys were coming in, the grief process. And he was still working out, but just all of that over time, that main root cause of what was going on with his health was that chronicity of stress. And so he asked me, he's like, well, what do I need to do to manage my stress? I'm like, Tyler, there's a lot of things that you can do to manage your stress. Some studies show movement, stretching. Some people will say yoga, which that's a whole nother conversation. Right. But I'm like, I'm pretty sure if you went to a yoga class, that would be 10 times more stressful for you. But like, like we were talking before the radio, just even like jujitsu and just how like what a great stress reliever you and your son have observed of getting choked out and hitting the mat a couple
times. The kinds of things you find relief in.
So stress and stress response and how you mitigate stress will vary from person to person. Tyler, where we landed was, hey, after work, one time a week, why don't you go and hit a bucket of balls? Just be by yourself, be quiet in your own thoughts, where you don't have your kids saying, Dad, 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 or your wife saying, when are we going to do this? And are you going to take me out on a date? And so that we could see that then he would have just a little bit to off burn that excess cortisol. So again, other things that we'll see around this chronicity of stress is the elevated fasting glucose, that A1C that won't budge despite diet lifestyle, the rising fasting insulin, the afternoon crashes, and then like the reactive hypoglycemia. So then their blood sugars just start yo-yoing regardless. And then that increased mean belly fat that we hate. So oftentimes patients will, come to our office that they've done their own research. They know that there's probably a cortisol or an adrenal issue. So they're, the first question is, what can I take? What can I take? And it's not that I don't love starting there. That can be a good tool, especially in the acute phases of stress adaptation. But oftentimes it's like, well, we got to get to the root of why are you stressed out?
So even though something looks like a metabolic issue, it might actually be a stress issue at the root. Brittany, we've talked before about that gut-brain connection. Y'all can listen to some of the previous episodes on that. But how does that stress affect those barriers?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics because it just connects to everything. The gut is not fun to talk about, but it's just so important. I had a call today where I was like, this is not sexy. No one wants to talk about it. But it's so crucial. So your stress activates your mast cells, so your immune cells that release inflammatory things. So when your mast cells are constantly activated, they disrupt your gut lining. Okay, so that leads to intestinal permeability and leaky gut, if you've ever heard of that.
Sure.
So which is like, I know all the buzzword now, but truly, people are like, I have patients come, they're like, well, what caused my leaky gut? Like, why am I, reacting to all these foods? I'm like, I can't tell you exactly. It could be medications, environmental burdens, but literally stress. This type of thing is what can cause, this reaction in the gut. And so when that happens, now we start to see a cascade of things happening. We have food sensitivities, skin flares, brain fog, anxiety. A lot of, I just had a kiddo in today who's like, they're worried about anxiety for their kid. And so their parents are asking questions about brain health and all that stuff. So I was like, we have to actually start in the gut because you're telling me your kid's bowels are not normal. They have skin issues. I was like, this doesn't sound exciting, but we need to start here. And then you will see a difference in, anxiety and mood disorders and behavior issues when we can kind of get to the root here. But it doesn't stop there. It also affects your blood-brain barrier. So they increase under chronic stress, and they can disrupt that barrier in the brain. So that's when people feel wired but tired, foggy, or overstimulated, or emotionally reactive to like Tyler, where it's like, this is not his normal, right? Mm-hmm. So when you feel like, I could handle this level of stress before and now I can't, that's kind of a sign that maybe it's more than just the stress that's going on.
Sure. So when someone says, they just feel off, again, foggy, anxious, inflamed, there may be something very real happening beneath the surface. Dr. Calla, let's talk hormones because stress seems to be affecting everything there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it affects hormones and often in ways that people don't expect. So let's start with the thyroid. Chronic stress increases inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-6. These cytokines suppress thyroid conversion, specifically the conversion of T4 into active T3. So oftentimes patients will go to primary care. They say, oh, they checked my thyroid. Everything looks fine. Oftentimes the preliminary test under conventional medicine is actually a hormone called TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone is released from the pituitary and then tells the thyroid, which is near our throat, to create what's called T4. And I always tell people, think 4-iodine. Then it loses 1-iodine and it converts to active T3. So in our office, we test all of the thyroid hormones because you can have a perfect TSH, but then a dysfunctional T4 because cortisol is sitting at that binding site. And so that's why we like not doing just specific adrenal testing or just specific thyroid or just specific hormones. It's because it's all interconnected. Sure. But at the same time, stress increases reverse T3, and we can see this. Reverse T3 is actually pretty inactive as a thyroid hormone, but the higher that T3 gets, we know that there's an underlying stressor, whether it's a metabolic, meaning there's a low-lying infection, yeast, fungus, or it's just the complete chronic stressors, and it could be like a mental anxiety that the person just is, exhausted, or they're just, I always say like, oh, the type A firstborn child, that they're always, I need to get the A, I need to be there early, those people that are just genetically wired that way. But so again, that's how stress and cortisol can affect just the thyroid production. Now DHEA. So DHEA is one of like the reproductive hormones. It's made because of the backbone of cholesterol. So from cholesterol, we get our progesterone, pregnenolone, cortisol, DHEA, testosterone, and all of our estrogens. And so in our office, I used to do more cortisol testing where we would test people's, like basically their circadian rhythm. We would test them several times throughout the day. They'd have to spit in a tube. It was really annoying. I felt like it was probably stressing people out in the first place. But we would want to get to see, okay, are they hypercortisol? Are they yo-yoing throughout the day? I stopped doing that because I've encouraged way more wearables, because to do a cortisol test, it's about $180 cost to the patient. But if we could get like a really great Garmin for $200 to $300, now I've got a different device that does test and detect stress. But now that patient has it for life, and we can see what are they doing Monday through Friday? What are they doing with their shifts? It tells me how many steps they're getting. It tells me about their sleep quality. So I always try to encourage the patients to get a wearable so that we can help understand physiologically how their body is handling stress. But the one test we do is a morning cortisol, and then we compare the cortisol ratio to the DHEA ratio. So both men and women need DHEA, but it is a precursor for testosterone and estrogen. So when adrenal reserve is low, so basically the adrenals are exhausted from pumping out so much cortisol all the time or irregularly, we'll see perimenopause symptoms worsen, sleep becomes more fragile, hot flashes increase, and mood instability increases. So men and women with low testosterone act sometimes and behave like a roided out testosterone excess. Wow. Just short fuse, angry, and then libido drops. And in my opinion, I think this is a big vital sign. I think God gave us sex drive with our spouse and intimacy as a gift. Right. And so when libido drops, whether it's from men or women, that's kind of the first sign, okay, there is a hormone decline and we should do that because by nature, we're wired to be intimate with our partners. So stress also suppresses ovarian hormone production directly. So this is where a lot of women in the reproductive years, they want to get pregnant. They're not pregnant by month 3 because everything on social media has everybody freaked out about their fertility status. Right. That stress and that worry in itself could actually be suppressing some of their own ability to get pregnant in the first place. So this is why women often notice cycle irregularities during stressful seasons of life. Stress tells the body is in survival mode is more important than reproduction. Hormone balance requires nervous system safety.
That's such an important point because when we say stress, I think people tend to picture, one thing, but stress isn't just deadlines or emergencies. It shows up in different forms, and not all of it's harmful. Some stress actually strengthens us. Dr. Keller, can you help us unpack that a little bit more? What are the different types of stress that we experience as humans, and how do we tell the difference between, the kind that builds us up and the kind that tears us down?
Yeah, so one of the biggest misconceptions thinking stress only comes from obvious physical strain, but stress is simply anything that demands adaptation from the body. So there's several major categories. We've got the mental emotional stressors. So this includes overthinking, anxiety, a trauma history, relationship strain, financial pressures, demanding careers, and then the caregiving fatigue. So people who are at high capacity, high achieving, or naturally analytical often carry a constant cognitive load. Their bodies may look calm, and they will look you in the eye and be like, yeah, no, I'm fine. But their nervous systems are not. For those of us with mental health struggles, that stress is more internal. The body doesn't distinguish between physical threat and a perceived one. So if your brain perceives a danger or pressure, cortisol responds. Then we've got physical stressors, and these include intense or over-exercising. I'll even add, to stress, working out at night. Working out in general is going to boost that cortisol. So a lot of times when patients come in, sometimes we just have to shift the timing of when they work out because that cortisol spike as a result of working out. I always tell people if you can get your workout done before 4 p.m., as long as you don't work swing shift, that would be more ideal for honoring your circadian rhythm. And in reality, honoring your circadian rhythm would be working out in the morning.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's what I try to do first thing.
Yeah.
Coffee, get into the word, and then work out.
Yeah, but more physical stressors, that sleep deprivation, illness and infection. And again, some of my high resilient or just super ultra dedicated people to fitness and working out, they will work out even when they're sick. Sometimes that can be helpful, getting a good sweat in, but sometimes it just further depletes them. But chronic inflammation and upset GI, blood sugar instability, under-eating and fasting too frequently or just maybe unwisely, and then dehydration. Then we've got metabolic stressors like skipping meals, the blood sugar crashes, highly processed foods, low protein intake. That's a huge metabolic stressor. And then just overall mineral depletion. Then we've got environmental stress, so the artificial light, the light on our devices, toxins, and even noise. Modern life, again, layers low-grade stressors continuously. So it's that chronic bombardment.
It really is interesting because a lot of people are tracking stress now. Again, heart rate variabilities, sleep scores, readiness scores. I actually usually wear a wearable, but I left it at home today. Maybe I was too stressed out. I don't know. So how accurate are those?
Yeah, so there's several out on the market. My bias is that I like the Garmin because, one, you don't have to pay for a subscription, and two, I have all of the metrics right on my watch here. I don't have to go look at my phone. Brittany likes the Oura Ring for a couple different reasons. Brittany, do you want to kind of talk about your Oura?
I like the Oura one. Well, for fertility tracking and things like that, I really like it because it tracks your temperature and things. But I also I cannot do notifications. I am too distracted. So I cannot have something on my watch, on my wrist, just any sort of vibrate. Like, nope. I want the data, but I only want to look at it once a day. I open it up in the morning. I see how I slept. And so I know some people will track it more continuously, but I do like it for that. I think what gets a little tricky, I can only speak for the Aura because that's what I've had, but it tracks my stress, and it will say I'm really stressed right now because I'm talking so much every time we do radio. I'm really not that stressed. Right. But things like this, or if I'm having a great day with my kids and we're laughing hard, it will say stress because, as we've been talking about, it is stress, but it doesn't differentiate necessarily good stress versus bad stress. So, having an exciting conversation, it's going to say I'm stressed. So that is nice, but it also, it does give good data of it'll tell me I have minor signs of something wrong, and then I will be sick 2 days later. So that's kind of nice, to get a little heads up that something's going on, because it tracks all these biomarkers, your HRV while you're sleeping, and just temperature as well. You want to speak to the Garmin?
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of great ones out there. Don't get me wrong. Whoop Strap is a good one. Oura Ring. I know some of the Fitbits and the more advanced Fitbits are. So how they detect stress has a lot to do with heart rate and respiration. And so we can detect as well. I have patients, they're like, what? They'll bring me their data. They're like, why am I so stressed out when I'm in the middle of deep sleep? So that's probably more of a physiologic, when did they eat their last meal? Was it really sugar? Did they have any fiber with it? So there's a lot of things that it can tell, but again, it's so unique to each individual patient. Again, I have a lot of what I would call high resilient patients. They're like, no, I'm fine. Right. I'm fine. And then it's when you really break it down, it's they actually are handling it all well, but inside their nervous system is saying, I'm exhausted and I'm waving the white flag. Sure. So I like being able to look at those metrics. Heart rate variability is the variation between beat to beat. That's the biggest one from how regulated and how balanced is your nervous system. Somebody who has a cortisol problem is probably not going to have a very good heart rate variability consistency. As Brittany was saying, heart rate variability might tank 1 to 2 days before you're even symptomatic for an illness. Mm-hmm. So she wasn't mentally stressed, but her body was physiologic because her immune system was already tagging something that was coming. Mm-hmm. I use the wearables a lot with my oncology patients because they don't have the barometer of when do I need to pick up my big girl panties and do hard work today, sure, or when do I need to rest because they're just the stress of having cancer, the stress of all the treatments and the appointments. And so it's one of those things that we want to help them recover well, fight the cancer well, but also most people need help in reminders of you need to take it easy. Sure. Mm-hmm. And then there's a few of the population that's no, we need to get you moving and it's going to be hard, but it's a temporary hard.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's where a lot of people are living, not in healthy challenge, but in constant overload. So I think the real question becomes, what's tipping people past that healthy threshold? Brittany, what are the primary things you're seeing that push cortisol into excess and keep people stuck in that state of strain?
Yeah, and I know we've probably touched on these throughout, but just kind of a summary here, chronic sleep disruption, fragmented sleep. If blunts your morning cortisol, this is parents of young kids where you're just chronically, some of these things you can't, my kiddos are not great sleepers. I haven't slept great in 6 years. I can't fully solve that problem. Right. So if there's one of these things you're there's really nothing I can do about this, then we need to just add in adaptations, right? So some people take adaptogens that are really helpful for helping your cortisol levels, but then if I can't get the sleep piece in, I'm going to really focus on my blood sugar. I'm going to make sure I have enough protein. I'm going to make sure I'm taking my multivitamins to help bridge any gaps. So those types of things. So if you're listening, you're okay, I can't fix this. Let's focus on other areas.
So people, can I ask, because you have the question, well, if you're having trouble sleeping, shouldn't you just take a sleep aid? And it seems like that's not the answer to the problem, but it's a multi-billion-dollar business for a reason. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
I think it really depends on, one, where you're at in the process. Do you have some nutritional deficiencies? Are you low on magnesium? Have you had any cortisol? Is it spiking at inappropriate times? So there are some supplements that are helpful for kind of blunting that before to get you into that deep sleep. But I think there are a lot of things you can do before you get all the way to the sleep aid, because then when people want to wean off of that, sometimes it's a really hard process.
I think it's a hard process. And again, I appreciate what the internet has done to be able to help patients, or just people make informed decision making on, what do they want to do. What I see, I don't know if you guys took any psychology classes, but like Intro to Psychology 101, Pavlov and the salivating dogs. And so he is what he did. The classic conditioning, he would ring a bell, give a dog food, ring a bell. And so he conditioned those dogs to every time they heard a bell, which has nothing to do with food, but now they associated that bell ringing. And so he took, he studied how long did it take until he could condition those dogs, and then how long did it take to decondition. Many of us, we have conditioned ourselves to either like stress addiction, sleep deprivation addiction. They had a thing when COVID happened that I think they called it sleep revolt. That parents would literally, like, once they had the kids to bed, they would just stay up and start binge watching TV because everybody was home all the time.
Sure.
And so, again, there's a conditioning. So sometimes, again, and it varies patient to patient, but sometimes I do like a sleep aid to help decondition. Their body has been so conditioned that the brain's waking up at 1 to 3 because that's what's been going on for the last 10 years. I have 10 years of deconditioning to undo,
right,
to get them to a better. So again, it depends on the patient, and sleep aids are not a one size fits all. Some people can handle melatonin, some kids can handle melatonin, some can't. And it's, almost worse for them. So it's one of those, again, a Goldilocks of what are we going to do to help break the learned habit or the cycle. So I think there's a time and place, but it just probably, to really honor the patient, it's probably going to be a little bit more individualized.
That was a big issue for me. Sleep. I think most of my, even young adult life into my adult life, I struggled with sleep, and even in just to recent years. And a while back, I got a PEMF mat, electromagnetic field mat. And I'll tell you what, if I just do that a couple nights a week, and it's anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, depending on the setting that you're using, you got to be careful, because if you throw that in front of your TV and you watch TV, you're
canceling each other out.
It's not the greatest. But read a book or while you're doing that, and it has dramatically changed that for me. And so, like you said, it's not a one size fits all, but it's a very interesting part of the conversation, no doubt. So.
Absolutely.
Could you tell your metrics got better when you
100%.
Yeah. So that's what's so nice about, again, a wearable, is because you can make one change and then observe what does it do to your physiology, the rest, the recovery, the HRV.
I get into deep sleep quickly when I use that. And I just in a general sense, even if I'm only doing a couple nights a week, all week long, that will happen. But the nights that I do use it, it's rapid.
Yeah.
I go walk into bed and I lay down and I'm out. And that is not my history, where there's times in my life where I'd spend 2 or 3 hours because my brain doesn't shut off. I'm always thinking, and that's not always a great thing.
It's a blessing and a curse.
It is.
Yeah.
I think some of my greatest ideas came at a lack of sleep. So
Sure.
I don't know that I implemented them, but...
Okay, some other things that help push cortisol, blood sugar instability, so those frequent spikes and crashes. I've talked to some people this week about the kiddos who don't sleep. I'm like, well, are they snacking all day long? They're like, yes. And I'm like, what are they snacking on? They're like, crackers, Cheez-Its, things like that. I'm like, we are just constantly having all these spikes. So things to do to help with that, just adding some protein and add some fats. And if you're going to eat oatmeal, throw a little oil. I use MCT oil and throw it on my kids, so we could just kind of level things out. But if your blood sugar is used to being up and down all day long, when you go to sleep at night, it's like a survival mechanism where your body's waking you up because we're not used to this being low. So sometimes just a protein heavy snack before bed. I know we've talked hey, don't eat 3 hours before bed. This is very individualized. So some people this is really helpful. Some people it is not.
Right.
So really kind of depends. But I found even with my kids, if I give them a protein heavier snack before bed, they tend to sleep a little bit better. But then chronic inflammation, so any autoimmune conditions, things like that. Overtraining, so high intensity workouts when you don't have the capacity to do it. Mental overthinking, like you said, that affects cortisol and sleep. High pressure jobs, constant notifications that we get on our devices all the time, just like that. I'm sure this has been studied, but I'd be very curious to just look and be the difference in people who live a life where they don't have social media, they don't have any emails, notifications, they work a job where they don't have to do that versus the other, because just that constant bombardment disrupts, or if you've ever checked your email before bed and then you're like, oh, and now I'm not sleeping good tonight because I just read this email that I can't do anything about right now. Right. So it wasn't a wise choice. Yeah. And then nutrient depletion, I think, is one of the most underrated ones. So your magnesium is really calming. So I know if you've heard of magnesium for sleep, that's why it helps calm down the nervous system. Low vitamin C, your adrenal glands need vitamin C in a lot of it. So when we're low in the vitamin C, that means your body has to keep activating your system. Low protein, like we talked about, stabilizes the blood sugar. Low iron. Iron you need for oxygen. So when your iron is low, your cells receive less oxygen, and then your mitochondria are able to do their job as efficiently, and then you get fatigue, and then your body is now compensating for that fatigue with more stress hormones. So it's funny how all these little things play together. Low minerals. So I think we've seen this a lot where we recommend patients just drink a little more electrolytes, especially if they're they're training a lot. Adding that in can be like very significant difference. So these types of things are common in like athletes, postpartum women. My sister-in-law was having like major dizziness with her last pregnancy, and she just threw in a pack and an element a day, completely better. So sometimes it is that simple of just like trying to balance things out. But the body can handle these stressors well individually, but when we stack them all on top of each other, it has a hard time adapting and surviving when we have all of these stressors compounding all the time.
So when we step back and look at the whole picture, blood sugar instability, sleep disturbances, hormone disruption, stress is touching every system, but the answer is not to panic. There's that concept, when in danger, when in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. And I think that most of society seems to live in that state at one time or another. It's not more hacks. It's not more intensity. It's not trying harder. The answer is going back to what God already built into our design. Psalm 127 tells us that it's vain to rise up early and to go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil. That feels incredibly relevant in a culture where I think we glorify exhaustion. I mean, people burn the candle at both ends, and you're expected to some degree. Maybe the issue isn't that we're doing too little. Maybe we're drifted from the basics, light in the morning, darkness at night, nourishment, rest, stillness. Dr. Calla, help us, I think, connect the dots here. How does the nervous system fit into all of this? And what does returning to those foundations actually look like?
Yeah, this is one of the things like in healthcare, again, it seems like so empty of saying, slow down and we need to evaluate, like, why are we currently in this, situation of chronic stress? Sometimes it's environment, like maybe I'm in a job that I don't like. Maybe it's, things in the marriage are not solid, or maybe it's just things are hard. Being a parent and having kids and the thralls of either not sleeping or just depending on where they're at in the stage. But it's like, okay, can we identify why this is happening, and then what's reasonable things that we can do? I think oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this too, where am I at in my prayer life and my spiritual walk, sure, right? Am I living incongruent and that this is a result of my own sin, that glorifies exhaustion? Like, I'm very fortunate. I love my job.
Right.
It's also probably a sin to the degree of how much I love what I do, because that, from okay, well, where are my priorities, right? Sure. If I'm not, spending enough time in the gospel, I can tell that actually translates to I'm spending way too much time on emails and working on work stuff. So I think sometimes, for any of us that are struggling with hypercortisol or wanting to do something about it, is we need to first have a come to Jesus meeting with ourselves, right, about what this is. And sometimes the Jesus meeting is, Jesus, I need you so much. Right. To help me get through this incredibly, there's first world hard and then there's real life hard, right? Mm-hmm. A girlfriend of mine lost her husband. He died of cancer. Single mom now, has 3 kids. That's a real life hard versus I was late to, running my kid to school today, got pulled over for speeding, spilled coffee, right? Different, types of hard of where we're at. But again, not to oversimplify, but first we need to the evaluate of why we're here, evaluate where we're at in our walk. But then 2, what's a reasonable plan? And that's usually, a patient to patient. Does it need to be cleaning up with the gut, or do we need 911? We need that nutraceutical support to at least help with a stress resilience so that we can support the immune system. So it's hard to say a blanket statement on what everybody needs to do, for it. But again, returning to the foundations is sleep. If sleep can be the most reasonable to get to, and I don't mean to, beat a dead horse with this, but when it's dark out, go to bed. If the sun is up, we need to wake up.
Time to get moving.
Yep. Again, then getting that workout. My bias is that if you can do it first thing in the morning, and these people don't need to join a CrossFit, except I think there's some things that CrossFit does well. Yep. Jiu-jitsu is great. Mm-hmm. Things that get you moving. Movement is medicine, and our bodies were not meant to be idle.
I love that. Finding something in those ranks that you're not just doing, though, to have the movement, but that you enjoy as well, so that you'll find consistency in it, and then even long-term commitments to it can be a big part of that. Because what I often find with folks is they'll find something that is working and it's checking a box, but they can't stand it.
Yeah.
And, them being committed to that long term is probably not really going to happen. And so really helping people to find things like that they can enjoy, whether it's gardening. And
Yes.
gardening is easy. I mean, we're learning that out at the homestead.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, as the snow is just starting to melt off, the prep and everything that's going on. I mean, there's so many different ways to make sure that your body is functioning and functioning well. And I think that this conversation is so important. And we didn't just scratch the surface. We're digging pretty deep into this, but it's one that I think people are going to have to come back to. I learned that way. I tend to have to hear things 2 or 3 times, and then you two will probably have to tell me to then do it. And I think that's important to have people like that in your life, and being able to make those connections is a key part of your success. Not just this is what I'm supposed to do, because we all have YouTube.
Yeah.
And I like it. I mean, there's a number of podcasters and YouTube people that I'll pay attention to. I've actually stopped listening to music. I'll go back and forth between YouTube or just Bible teachings when I'm working out in the mornings. But it's one thing to listen to those folks and to hear what they're saying. It's something else to learn and apply it. Mm-hmm. And that's, I know, one of the things that we're hoping to accomplish with folks is help them hear, hey, there's this issue, and you may be categorizing it over here, but that's not really where it's supposed to go, and there are things that you can do to fix that. Now, let's get you plugged in to figure out how to fix it. And that's where I think people going and actually making connections with you in the office is such a great opportunity. So if you're in the Northeast Iowa area, I'd highly encourage you guys to reach out to Dr. CJ or to Brittany over at Back in Line, because being able to make those connections, because being able to listen to them here is great. Being able to talk to them and share what's going on in your life, that's even better. Highly encourage you to do that. But we are out of time. I do want to leave you with this thought to chew on a bit as you go. In the book of Genesis, we can see that work and rest were built into creation. Actually, in Acts chapter 17, when Paul's speaking at Mars Hill, we're reminded that in him, in God, we live and we move and we have our being. That rhythm, effort and restoration, it's woven into how we are made. The book of Lamentations tells us that our Lord's mercies are made new every morning. And you know what? That includes your health. The same God who designed the sun to rise each day, he designed your cortisol to rise each day. I just learned that this afternoon. There's wisdom in that rhythm. Honor that rhythm, and you honor your Creator. If you'd like to listen to some previous episodes, I'd encourage you guys to check out our website, wholehealthlive.com, or look for Whole Health pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you in his ever-loving arms. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for joining us today on Whole Health. If you'd like to learn more about our program, have a question for our hosts, or want to find past episodes, just head to wholehealthlive.com.